Today we have with us Ms. Shruti Sharma, topper of UPSC Civil Service Examination 2021 on the campus of IIPA. She is going to discuss about her strategy for preparation of the UPSC Civil Service Examination in 3 parts: preliminary, main and interview, which is also called the personality test. I am Ashok Vishandass, Professor of Applied Economics in IIPA. On behalf of IIPA and on my own behalf, I welcome you, Shruti Sharma, and it's my singular privilege to interview you on the preparation strategy for civil service examination for the benefit of future civil servant of the country.
Thank you.
And let me congratulate you also, because you made not only the women proud of yourself, but your parents, family members and all relatives and the society in general. How do you feel about this achievement?
Thank you, sir. First of all, I feel very happy. I feel very privileged that I was able to do this and able to make my parents proud in some way, people around me really happy. So I'm really happy, and also I'm really excited for what the journey of the civil services holds for me.
Yeah, and the civil service offers a lot of services.
Yes.
So what is your first preference in the order of priority of the services?
So my first preference is the Indian Administrative Services, and my second preference was the Indian Foreign Services.
I think it gives a great honor and pride to serve the nation.
Yes.
So I think you will get a great feeling and great job satisfaction.
Yes.
Could you introduce yourself? What is your background? From which state you come from? Your schooling and college, and which subject interests you most?
Sir, I was born in Bijnor in Uttar Pradesh, and my parents are also from Uttar Pradesh. But I got my schooling in Delhi. I did my schooling till class 5th from Cambridge School, New Friends Colony, and then from 6th to 12th from Sardar Patel Vidyalaya. Humanities I took in 11th and 12th. The social sciences subjects really interested me, and especially history. So I took history in my graduation at St. Stephen's College. So that was my schooling and education.
So I guess in the civil service examination you opted history as an optional.
Yes.
At what stage of your academics you decided that you have to write civil service examination and become a civil servant?
Yes, sir. I think I always was clear that I wanted to do something where I was working on the ground, doing something with the people. But civil services as a profession, I thought would be the best such platform to provide such an opportunity to me. So this I decided close to the end of my graduation that I would give the exam. So this towards the last year of my graduation I decided, and I started preparing. I had even taken admission in my MA at JNU, and so I was doing it. But at that point, I decided that I'll do it full time, my preparation. So after my graduation, I started preparation.
Okay, you didn't take up any job so far before writing the exam?
No, I didn't take up any job. I used to sometimes go and teach in the school in my village back in UP. So I used to hold workshops, do things like that. But I did not take up any job after my graduation.
Now, if we see the civil service examination journey, it's almost 17 months from the date you apply and date that you join, not the date of result. So how do you divide this journey, say preliminary, then main, then interview? How did you prepare? Does the preparation require a different kind of imperatives, or you had an integrated strategy throughout?
Yes, sir. Sir, I think we can't very clearly divide all 3 stages in terms of their preparation. It is definitely an integrated preparation of sorts, especially at the very beginning where you're laying your foundation of the preparation. So, in fact, my first attempt I did not give, even though I was eligible, because I felt that although even if I would have cleared the prelims, I could not have been given justice to the mains examination because that was not very strong. So I think it is an integrated preparation of sorts, but at the same time there are slight changes to the preparation strategy that we make 2-3 months before prelims, 2-3 months before mains, and simultaneously interview. So my strategy was to first do the basics, right? Do the basic books, which would help both in the prelims and in the mains, and 2-3 months before prelims make your study pattern a little oriented towards mains, where it's slightly more factual and not. And then towards mains, I used to focus more on answer writing, which would help in that regard.
So let us start from preliminary,
Yes,
because I find that out of almost 10 lakh people apply for civil service examination,
Yes.
but of course 5 to 5.5 lakh right,
Yes.
but out of that only about 10,000 in
Yes.
2021, 9,200 qualified. So the ratio of those who qualify preliminary is very low compared to those who write the exam. Definitely it requires a lot of preparation.
Yes.
So how did you focus your preparation for the preliminary exam?
Yes, sir. So personally, also prelims I found the most challenging of all the 3 stages. And last 2-3 years, the nature of the prelims questions has also changed. I think apart from making sure that your basics are strong, because I think even this year, previous year, you find that more than half the questions no one has seen before. Like it's not something that's straight out of a book that you can really prepare for. So more important than a wide range or reading too much or spreading your preparation really wide, I think first and foremost your conceptual understanding of things must be very strong, so that you can apply it there rather than just mugging up things. And because that doesn't help that much, it's not just factual knowledge that you have to regurgitate. So things like polity, economics, I feel were more or less, although there was certain changes, but if you had your basics strong, you could apply those things. And economics also, certain concepts, if you know, you could eliminate things and do that. So I used to make sure that my very basic subjects like polity, like economics, I used to revise and re-revise from my basic books, whichever I was following, be it NCRTs, be it something else. Apart from that, one thing that ended up helping me, I thought, was looking at previous year question papers. Because answering test series is one thing, but previous year question papers, sometimes I felt the exact questions also, if you look at go a few years down the line, they were also sometimes repeated, or you would get to know. So one example that I often give is that last year there was this question on Mongols which came,
right,
and it was a slightly different question. People didn't know the answers to it, but if a person had gone back and read a little bit more about the Mongols in that context, then that person could probably have cracked this year's question on the Mongols, because it was a slightly, 2-3 options more were there. So these things sometimes I used to do. I used to look at questions and then look at the other options. I used to Google search and see what they were also about. So they helped me in say history. I remember there was this question on Parivrajaka which was mentioned, which is a renunciant, and it was, that option was in some previous year paper which I had gone through.
Okay.
So these things, I think, apart from looking at the basic syllabus, revision again is important, 2-3 times basic books revision, looking at previous year question papers, and more than that, during those 2 hours maintaining a calm mind, because some people have that knowledge, they've studied a lot, but they're not able to if they see 5 wrong questions or 5 questions they don't know, they get a little panicky. So it's very difficult to come back after that because time is very less. So having a calm mind during the 2 hours is also very important.
So this is very interesting, because the PYQ you are suggesting it's very, very important. That is one aspect. But for this solving PYQ, what kind of resources you depend and you fall back upon? Now there is a lot of material, both digital and printed, and the written ones and the coaching.
Yes.
So do you depend on digital resources, magazines, books, notes, or you prefer the written ones?
Sir, I am personally a little more traditional in that regard. I do during my entire preparation, I did refer more to my books, the newspaper, rather than any more of online material. I did refer to online material as well, but that was only as an addition to my main basic books, and used to keep on adding. So for example, if certain concept I didn't understand in the book that I was reading, so I used to watch a small YouTube video, just Google search it, and just as an addition to it, mainly I relied on my books that I was using. So, and say for geography, it was the NCRTs only. So there was no other book that I looked at for geography apart from the NCRTs. Sometimes there are these monthly and yearly compilations of current affairs that you get from the market. So those I used to use. Sometimes a few videos that I would watch online, but mainly whatever books I had. So for polity, it was Lakshmikant. For economics, I had certain notes that I took from Zulfikar sir was sir that was in the RCA, so his notes I used. Then for history, there was this spectrum which I used apart from my optional knowledge. Environment, there's this Shankar book which comes, which I used. So there was this one book which I used for my basic knowledge. Apart from that, I used to search on Google, make my own notes. Things like that I used to do.
Yeah, this is a preliminary one part. Another part is the CSAT.
Yes.
And I have seen a number of students who are not from mathematics background, but they have opted mathematics as an optional also, but they also fail.
Yes.
Though requirement is 33%, that means just you have to secure 66 marks out of 200. That means if you correctly solve 27 questions, you will be through. But yet, many people are not able to cross this CSAT requirement of 33%. So how do you handle that?
Yes, sir. Definitely. I think in the last 2 years, I've personally seen people who have had engineering backgrounds also and relatively good at maths also. They're not also getting through this and getting very high marks in the GS papers and still not getting through. My personal strategy, I personally did not have too much issue both the years. I got around 100 plus marks both times. But I think I still did not neglect it, because sometimes what people do is have done that they neglect the paper till the very end, and then they're not able to match up in those last 1 month, because there's a lot to do. But at least 1.5 months before, I used to just solve previous year question papers with respect to CSAT. So for example, number system is a topic that has a lot of representation recently. 13-14 questions were coming, so I used to just solve question papers. I used to start a YouTube video of a person solving the question papers, pause it, solve it myself, and then see if the person is doing it in a different way or there's some addition. And after the end of those previous year 5-6 years papers, if I've solved, then I had a list of formulae related to number systems that I would write down whatever I encountered while solving it or all of that. And towards the end, when I used to finish almost all the syllabus, I had 5-6 pages worth of those formulas for mathematics or reasoning, all of that. So I used to go through those formulas again and again. Towards the end, something that I thought helped me apart from just the solving of questions was also previous 3-4 year papers. I used to sit down in the time limit and do it. And because I think one thing which in the CSAT is very important is what to leave and what to attempt, because negative marking really pulls a lot of people down, and time management again is major. So I used to make sure that within 30 minutes, because it's a 2-hour paper and there are 80 questions, within 30 minutes I would at least look at 20 questions, and I used to get into the habit of looking at the question and seeing if I should attempt it or not. So within that 30 minutes, whether I'm attempting or I'm leaving, but I needed to go through those 20 questions, which sometimes people don't go through because there's very little time. They only go through 50-60 questions. Maybe it's a likelihood that the last 20 questions are easy, that they can also do it. But so I made sure that within those 2 hours I had at least seen all 80 questions. And secondly, even if say there's an English question, because the English questions also are a little tricky nowadays. You can't really get through it, even though like I felt that my English was relatively better. So even if I had spent 2 minutes going through a question and I found it was very, very confusing, the answers, I used to not just tick for the heck of it. If I don't know it, I used to go and skip to the next question, even if I had spent 2 minutes on it, because the negative marking really pulls you down.
Yeah.
So I think that was my strategy for CSAT.
Yeah, that's very smart
sir.
way of doing the things,
Yes.
I must think, and I think it's very inspiring for the young people who are going to write. Now, how many hours a day on an average you spend for preparation of the preliminary?
Sir, I think I personally, this is not, I'm saying randomly, but I never counted as such in terms of or thought about these are the hours that I'm studying, but definitely a certain amount of hours you do need to devote in a day. Overall, throughout my preparation, around at least 6 to 8 hours I did study in a day. Before prelims, before mains, it became even more prolonged, because at that time you're just getting up to eat something and then going back, because the pressure is that much. So during that time it really increased, and I don't know how many hours I studied as such, because we used to just take small breaks and come back. So I think that was my rough thing, but around 6 to 8 hours generally I used to spend.
And then this duration increased when after preliminary result came, and then main you start.
Yes, sir.
So obviously you must
sir.
have increased and escalated
Yes, sir.
the
Yes.
depth and width of this.
Especially after prelims, because this time also the time was very less after the prelims for the mains examination. Around 2 months we got after the result. So at that time it was only studying that I was doing, apart from just eating, taking small breaks definitely in between. But
so for main exam, out of those 7 main paper on which candidates merit is decided, 5 are compulsory, and that everybody has to write. Only 2 are optional, depending on your choice of the subject you opt. So on those 5, you have some specific references, the material you refer to for your preparation, or did you mark in the resources itself, or you made a separate note? And how did you divide your time on those 5 compulsory papers?
5 compulsory papers. Yes, sir. So the 5 compulsory papers includes the essay and GS 1, 2, 3 and 4. So for the essay, I think some time should be devoted. Some people neglect it, but I think it's something that if you put a little bit of effort in, you can sort of reap rewards, because the difference is a lot. This time people have scored as low as 60s and 50s in the essay paper, and people have scored 150 as well. So the difference is huge, and you can make gain an edge in the essay paper. For the essay paper, I tried to maintain for the essay as well as GS4 paper. So some things were common in both of them, so I used in both of them. But I used to prepare a list of say quotes or examples, a list of say mythological anecdotes or stories that I could add, and these things I continuously, if I was going through a newspaper and I found something interesting which say I cannot use in GS 1, 2 and 3, I used to write it down under the essay wala thing, that this is something that I can probably use there. It's an interesting anecdote, or some nice philosophical quote, or if I'm reading a book, say a fiction book, so a reference to that, because sometimes when you're reading, you're not looking at it from that point of view. But I used to sort of tell myself, this is something that I can use here, some interesting character, you can talk about his or her philosophical, so if I was say reading Crime and Punishment, so talking about Raskolnikov, I could just think about, this is something that I can use later. So these things I used to do while preparing throughout. So while I was reading the paper, all of these things, and it doesn't require too much effort. I feel it's going on your everyday thing. For the essay, I used to do that. For GS1, so there is society, history and geography mainly in this. For society, I did not refer to any specific book. I made my own notes for that, because there are clear-cut words which are mentioned in the syllabus, population, urbanization, women and all of these things, and I feel 1 or 2 pages of notes that you can make, it helps in the examination, because even if you look at previous year question papers in GS1 society, they are clearly from the syllabus, some different ways in which they use those keywords from the syllabus, but I used to make notes of that. A certain nice quote if I found on a population about say demographies, education is the best contraceptive or something. I used to write that, that if a question on population comes, which it did come this year in the GS1 paper, I could use that somewhere towards the end in the conclusion. So for GS1, I made my own notes through online material. I used to Google search or other books, so collated material, made 1 or 2 pages notes of each topic in the syllabus. For history, I had my optional background, plus I think whatever you've read in the prelims, for the prelims, I think that sort of suffices. Because,
it suffices.
Yeah, it suffices. So those books only you can revise, whether it's Spectrum or the NCRTs that you have gone through. The Fine Arts 11th class NCRT also I find is good, so that also one can go through. Certain questions can be answered from that. Medieval, whatever, I think Tamil Nadu NCRT, some people follow R.S. Sharma, so whatever works for them, but the prelims thing can be used. Similarly for geography, I mainly used my NCRT NCERTs. I used to, for geography also, I had gone through the NCERTs or GC Leong and made 2-3 pages of diagrams separately. So at the end, I could just go through the diagrams and think, Yacha, this is something that I can reproduce in the paper if I get a question that is related to it. So 2-3 pages of diagrams I had made separately. So that I did. Apart from that, the whatever test series later on I had, so I used to, this was for the static part. Any sort of new geography questions or something new that is happening, that used to be covered in the test series. For GS2, polity mainly is there and international relations is there. International relations, again, I had sort of made my own notes for it. So my notes for the newspaper I made regularly, but I did not make notes as such that, some people take the newspaper and they make article-wise notes. So that I did not do. I used to use the newspaper to make notes related to the syllabus or related to anything that I thought would come in the examination. So if, say, I see a fertilizer policy, if I see a nice article, I'll use it thinking that, GS3 mein agriculture is this section. So for fertilizer, this is something that I can use. And if I find that that article is lacking or it's only covering one part, then I would use Google or use any other book to make comprehensive notes on that. So if there's a topic which is coming about interstate disputes, so then I'll make notes about interstate disputes overall and add that part, and then leave some part at the side for adding any other interstate dispute which may arise in the next 1 month or 2 months. So I used to leave space for that. So I used to make notes related to the syllabus per se. GS2, I had made my own notes sort of for polity, apart from referring to Lakshmikant for things like fundamental rights and all of that. So GS2, I had made that. I have put some of these notes also on the Telegram channel, polity notes and all of that. So for, say, Parliament, I used to make those notes and keep. So if there's a recent parliamentary session where I read in the newspaper that these bills were passed in 12 minutes or something, so that's a nice line, so I can just add that there and then use it in my answer when we are talking about parliamentary inefficiency or parliamentary discussion sort of dwindling. So these were data or examples which sort of make the answer better rather than just saying that discussions have decreased. I can give concrete data for it.
Yeah, because that supports your argument, and you have to give the good reasoning.
Yes.
So that, and I have analyzed the data of the candidates securing marks in different papers, and that really determines your overall merit. Now, I find the divergence of the marks of the various candidates between the essay paper and GS4, which is ethics and integrity, is much wider compared to the GS 1, 2, 3.
Yes,
now, people find it difficult to start some topics of the essay. For example, in your exam 2021, that reminds me that there was an essay on the topic history repeats itself. The first, it is tragedy, and second it is a farce. Now, how do you approach this to build the argument? Many candidates come to me, they find it very difficult. And then some abstract topics, real is rational, rational is real. And obviously, you have to attempt to, I don't know which topics you attempted in the essay, but suppose you are given these two. How do you approach for the benefit of those young aspirants who are going to write from now onwards? So, because if you elaborate on...
Yes, sir. I think the two essays that I attempted was, one was the philosophy of wantlessness is utopian, and while materialism is a chimera. This was the topic.
Yes.
This was the first topic, and the second one was the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. So these were the two topics that I chose, but generally for
how did you dissect it and then build the argument on that?
Yes, sir. So I think what I tried to do generally while I was writing essays, even while I was practicing, was, and these become very challenging. First of all, choosing one out of the first four is also very challenging. So, in fact, this time I took a little time also, because I had chosen one. Then I started sort of thinking about it. I thought that I could not, diversify it that much, that topic. So then I chose the other one, the philosophical. The wantlessness one.
Okay.
The wantlessness one. But anyway, so I think what I tried to do initially was try to understand the core of the for myself, because I think the first 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes when you're chalking out the essay is very, very important. If you sort of waste too much time or go astray during that time period, or in understanding what the essay means and what it's trying to do, because this happened a lot with lots of aspirants, say the hand that rocks the cradle rules, they didn't understand what it was.
The import of that, yes.
So just thinking about the essay for the first 2 minutes, thinking about what it wants to sort of say, and you can, I think, also take a position in opposition to it. It's not necessarily that you have to go along
thesis and antithesis.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So firstly, what I try to do is think about it. I used to start taking various dimensions of the essay, the introduction and the ending. This is something that I try to do. The introduction and the ending I used to try to link in some way. And I think the introduction generally in an essay, although you can start directly also, but it's interesting and it's nice when it's a little catchy, when it catches the examiner's attention. So I sometimes used some mythological stories or mythological incidents which I used in the beginning, or I used certain quotes, or there was a certain character in a fiction book again that you sort of find interesting. So it's sometimes a little bit effort if you put in having a collection also of these things that you can use in the beginning and the end of essays, which while you're doing it, I think, because in those, I've realized that during the mains, while you're writing the mains and the essay and all of that, you don't have too much time to think, like, because all of that background work needs to be done before you're actually writing this examination. So having a good collection of these quotes and all, where you can, mix and match, it doesn't have to be very different. You don't have to sometimes, because sometimes people forcefully put these quotes and things, so that also feels a little awkward. But having enough so you can put the right one there.
It should relate to the topic. You gave the general prescription how to approach, but specific. Now, in case you are able to recollect what you wrote in those essay, that will be very useful for our viewers.
Yes, sir. So I think in the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, I try to introduce it, link it with childhood and sort of motherhood, and how that sort of determines the child's later part as well. So I talked about Shakuni Mama in the first in this essay, about how he was this formative person in the early part of the Kauravas, and his mindset and all of that ultimately determined how the Kauravas were. And similarly, I talked about Yashoda and Devaki. So although Devaki was the one who birthed Krishna, but it was actually Yashoda who rocked the cradle and brought Krishna up. So her is the name which is more known to the world rather than Devaki. And I try to bring this towards the end, and try to counter it also and look at other aspects. So this was I talked about motherhood. I talked about teaching and the role of a teacher as well, because he or she is also a person who is in the formative years of a child. Apart from that, I try to look at other aspects. Say, for example, in the political aspect, I talked about lobbying, about how when you're giving seed funding, or when you're sort of giving that money to a political party, say, then you're also determining that person's decisions as well. Or that so, for example, if Trump, when you talk about Trump, so gun lobbying is something that is happening. The hand that is rocking the cradle or giving money to it is also determining the policy decisions. So things like that. So not just looking at, so even if it's a philosophical topic, trying to look at other dimensions, so political, economic, environmental. Similarly, for the other topic about philosophy of wantlessness is utopian, and materialism is a chimera. So even looking at what utopia is. So firstly, what I tried to do was, in most essays, in order to make myself understand better and the examiner understand better, I used to dissect the topic initially also. Apart from, so for example, you start with some anecdote incident, and then in the second, third paragraph, you start talking about what is the philosophy of wantlessness. When you're talking about wantlessness, the difference between want and need. What is utopia? So if utopia necessarily sometimes also means that it's unachievable. So you can start questioning that also. That wantlessness is not necessarily not achievable, because then you talk about the Shramana tradition here, or the idea of aparigraha in Jainism. So linking that with our Indian philosophy, then questioning it in terms of whether it's ideal to be utopian or whether it is good that it is utopian, because we should always move towards some sort of utopia, and idealism is something that is nice, good also. Then with respect to materialism, linking it to environment, and about how materialism is a chimera, even though we're going towards this extremely sort of needy world where we want more and more, but the impact that is happening on the environment regarding that, and how that is sort of true prosperity is not coming to us. Then I also talked about, I think, the coming back to sort of minimalism. So Japan, minimalism is something which is coming back as a lifestyle choice, because you've realized the limits of materialism. So trying to think, I think some people say that not if you don't have a background in like sort of, if you haven't read too many books, if you don't know all of that, you can't write a good essay. But I think that is like writing in a flow is very important, and reading other examples is also really good. But I think just thinking also about things that we already know and trying to incorporate them in the essay. So if for example there's a folk tale or there's some example from nature that you can find, just trying to think and use it there. I think we know sometimes a lot of stuff, but we a little hesitant in using it. But I think we should be very sort of work around with these things, because essay is one place where you can like let your creativity
be exhibited.
Yes.
My understanding about essay, and many experts believe essay is really a test of your EQ and IQ both.
Yes.
And then you have to connect, as you correctly said, the beginning, the introduction to the end and conclusion. And conclusion not just a summarization, but beyond that, what is the prescription, and then it has to be optimistic note. So how did you connect your introduction to the end?
Yes, sir. I think with respect to firstly, it's been a long time, so certain things I'm finding it difficult to remember. But say the Krishna thing, maybe the second essay that I used. So I was also trying to connect towards the end about how say motherhood, because I started with all of that, about how motherhood, even though it's sort of ruling the world, some sort of the antithesis I tried to bring by saying that we're not giving it actual importance in terms of, say, the patriarchy that is happening in the world today. Then with regard to say Shakuni Mama and Krishna and all that talked about, sometimes the childhood phase is very important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the only thing that is going to determine you for life. So the teachings that Krishna gave later on, say to Arjun in the Rath. So I think it was not, I was trying to sort of say, I can't remember exactly how I put
it's
it.
Fine, yeah.
But things about how you started in terms of this is the formative phase, Shakuni Mama and all. But at the same time, you can also change your course later in life as well. It's not necessarily that everything will be. So this is something that I tried to do.
So basically, nature and nurture both work together.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Now, all civil servant has to exhibit the ethics in their public life, and I'm sure it holds good for everybody. Now, this is one of the question in GS4. Identify 5 ethical traits on which you can plot the performance of the civil servant.
Yes.
Can you give us some 4 or 5 traits which, according to you, are most important for a civil servant?
Yes, sir. See, this was a question this time in the ethics paper as well. I think I used mostly the Nolan committee principles, the 7 Nolan committee principles which have been used. So I talked about selflessness or public orientation. I tried to link, so selflessness is a word which is mentioned in the Nolan committee, but I linked it with the public orientation. And whenever I was giving, so with respect to ethics paper, whenever I was giving any answer, especially the first half, I tried to give examples, adding it. So I think that's what sort of pushed my marks also a little bit. So if I'm talking, say, about selflessness and public orientation, I would say use the example of Tamboli Ayaj, who worked in the Maoist areas and built a hospital in Kozhikode, I think. So that example that I would give. Then courage is a second ethical trait I think I mentioned. So for that, I would say give the example of Sanjukta Parashar in the Bodo militancy. She's an IPS officer who sort of worked there. So that example. Then we can talk about openness and transparency, because that is important, because it would bring in accountability. So even when we are mentioning those terms, try to explain how it helps and then an example. So this was one thing. Then leadership in terms of taking the initiative and not being a secondary sort of bystander, ability. And then in EI also, I think I wrote in terms of being open to criticism, because you're not just it's not a top-down approach, but you're open to sort of opening. So these are certain things that I thought. Integrity is something that I talked about. So these were a few traits.
You supported by your argument. You gave the anecdote about that. Only then it makes the complete answer.
Otherwise, it's just words. But you have to try to say why it's important.
Give the reasoning and justification for your in support of this. This is very important. And I'm sure this will be very useful. There was another question which was very important, for example, in GS3 on the water, because water is very precious natural resource. Now, if we apply in the agriculture the micro irrigation, do you think and to what extent it can solve the problem of our water crisis?
Yes, sir. I think I started this answer with because at that time this data is also on the tips of your finger. So I started with some data regarding both micro irrigation in terms of area in India under micro irrigation, and also the water crisis. So I think it was some Niti Aayog report which says that within this much time this percentage of area is water stressed currently. So I started with that. Then in terms of after the introduction, since the question is also, I think looking at breaking down the question is something that I try to do in my answers. So firstly, I talked a little about water scarcity and how it's sort of affecting us. So certain data about that. Then coming to micro irrigation and how it can benefit. So the benefits of micro irrigation in, say, decreasing, so the amount used is less, so with respect to the water scarcity is good. Secondly, it also helps in sort of preventing soil erosion, because the nutrients don't go away. Then it directly goes in, so the absorption by the plant is also more, so the productivity also increases. So things like that I try to mention. Then other things apart from micro irrigation, I try to talk about where so it's micro irrigation only can't be a silver bullet. There are other things that are also happening. So say vertical farming, or there was this SWAS new system that was introduced in, I think, Rajasthan. So those I talked about. Climate specific water scarcity, the traditional ways in which, so say the dome band sort of the system, or the Johar, this thing. So not just in terms of micro irrigation, but other ways in terms of water conservation that you could talk about. That I mentioned. And micro irrigation, I think towards the end I also mentioned certain schemes which are happening and which need to be encouraged along with other steps. So there was I think 2-3 sort of divisions I made in the paper in terms of talking about water scarcity, talking about the benefits of micro irrigation, alternatives to micro irrigation, and then talking about all of them together in the conclusion.
There were very interesting questions in 2021. I wanted your views on 1 or 2 more questions. For instance, there was a question, can the civil society and the non-governmental organization present a model of giving the public delivery system and what will be the challenges?
So, yes, sir. I remember this, and I think the question was also, can it be an alternative? So
yes, can it be alternative, and what will be the challenges?
Yes, sir. So I think I remember I drew this sort of diagram in this paper, where I think the public was at the center, and the government, the NGOs, the media, there's this circle which was providing service to the people. So basically throughout the answer I tried to portray that it's not an either or thing. So I made that diagram, and I talked about how the civil society and NGOs can be a supportive hand in terms of reaching out to the people. So firstly, say in terms of providing awareness. So there are certain government schemes which do exist, but sometimes the awareness is not there among the people. So the NGOs can help the government in providing that awareness. So say there are civil society, I can't remember the name.
It's fine. Yes.
Yeah, but like I use certain examples.
Yeah, conceptual framework. Yeah.
So for political political awareness, I use that example of that specific NGO, which is providing a sort of political empowerment by letting people know about their rights, know about government schemes. So for political, I would use that. Then for environment, I would say that there are certain areas where because the spread is so much, rural areas, the government can't probably reach everywhere. So these people would go there. So certain examples I would use of environmental NGOs. Then newer initiatives that are taken, so Bachpan Bachao Andolan with respect to so I've also made a chart where I was showing different arenas and one example of an NGO or one example of a civil society organization. So this was something that I did, but at the end I would also say that this is not the this can't be an alternative to the government. The government has to provide certain basic facilities in health and all of that, because there is a democratic aspect related to the government which the civil society sometimes can't be there, because there are elected people in the government. So the primary role is that, and the civil society and all can be partners in providing this. So, and then because certain negatives of the NGOs a little bit, I also said that there are certain questions that have been raised with respect to certain NGOs, whichever they were, so Greenpeace, whatever, what was happening. I used to just state that with facts, and then towards the end, the point was this only, that both of them should come together and
it's very interesting views. You are giving a solution and views which are unconventional, and therefore it makes it very different because you stand out. There was another interesting question: what are the socio-economic implications of development of IT industries in big cities of India, and your views on that?
So in this question also, I think I made a small map where I plotted a little bit the IT industries, say in Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, all of these things. I did a small map I made in the end. Then socio-economic, firstly I talked about this proliferation of IT. So the first, you can start, I think, I don't remember how exactly I started, but we can talk about the importance of the primacy of the service sector in India and how that is booming, and the IT is at the central focal point of it in terms of the global representation of India in the service sector. So that I started with, and then socio-economic implications can be a lot. I think then also you can start giving examples. So I think all through my 4 papers, I tried to give examples.
So that was your focus.
Yes.
That makes very interesting, and that stands out your question.
Yes.
Now, yes, please.
So for Delhi, so things like I remember migration was certain things. So urban migration. Then you can talk about the proliferation of slums. I talked about in, say, Delhi, in Bombay, because there's a huge in-out migration. Sometimes what happens is, say in Maharashtra, the insider-outsider thing which comes
debate,
up.
yes.
So regionalism, that sometimes gives a boost to regionalism of a certain kind because of this population explosion. Sometimes it also happens. Then impact on the environment also little bit. Then say if it's an out migration, what happens is there's a feminization of agriculture, so that becomes a socio-economic issue as well in the villages, because there's a lot of out migration, brain drain. So these are certain things that I sort of talked about. Environmental, in terms of pollution and all of that, which sometimes happens. Then the change in population. So population relation, there were a lot of things in terms of population explosion, development of slums, feminization there. Sometimes impact on, but sometimes it's positive also. I think I talked about where there's development of knowledge hubs in these areas, say Delhi, Bangalore, where a lot of highly educated people sort of come together. So that's also a trickle down thing. So both positives, negatives, these.
The answer becomes comprehensive. Yeah. Now, so much about the main written test.
Yes.
Now let us come to the interview, because that is crucial, because they test the personality.
Yes.
So how did you prepare for this?
Yes, sir. For my interview, actually, I did not prepare too much. I thought I should have prepared more. But the thing was that after the mains, I became a little relaxed. I started. I wasn't preparing too much after my mains, because I was relaxing a little bit. My health was also not that good at that point. But after the result came, I didn't have too much time because 8th was my interview. 5th the interviews had started.
5th,
so I didn't have too much time. But I think what I tried to do was I tried to just look at my DAF, look at each and every word in my detailed application forum, try to prepare material regarding that, any possible questions that could be asked. Then apart from that, any newspaper that I was reading, I started reading 1 or 2 newspapers. Mainly I used to read the Indian Express, the Hindu also I used to read before, so certain things. So I think in the interview, more than the prelims and the mains, more opinion building and sort of backing, having a comprehensive knowledge of things so that you can have a good discussion on it is important. So getting into the depth of what an issue is, why an issue is. So I used to read the newspaper for that. There were certain podcasts also, Google Podcasts, I had downloaded that, and there were certain podcasts. There's this 3 Things by Indian Express which was there. So I used to listen to it almost every day, where any 3 things which are happening in the news are picked up and it's analyzed in a certain way. So that helped me in sort of revising also any news that was there. So for news, I used to do that. My detailed application form I sort of did, and then I went for a couple of mock interviews to get a little bit of that feel as well. So this is all that I
did. You find those mock interviews useful?
So yes, so sometimes it's useful in terms of, because when you're just reading and not saying it out in front of someone, you don't know exactly how you'll be able to handle that question. Say for example, if you don't know a question, so how do you handle that? So in those things it does help. The final interview for me was very different from how the mock interviews had gone. So that way it didn't help that much, but for some people sometimes certain questions also are repeated there. So I think it sometimes helps in getting a feel of it somewhat, but you shouldn't completely sort of rely
on that.
Yes,
so when you went for actual interview,
yes,
what were your feeling? How you came out, and then did you have any very high note which made you pleased? And sometime during the course of the interview, did something happen which made you a little bit sad or not very comfortable kind of situation? So can you give one episode of each of those for the benefit of our viewers?
Yes, I think overall after I left the interview hall, I wasn't very happy with my interview. I was expecting a much better interview. But when I entered, I thought I was a little nervous at that point, because I had to go second supposedly, but then I was shifted to first, and I was the first person to go in, and there was a lot of, so I was a little, I was a little nervous because I was a little jittery at that point. So I entered, I sat down. At that point, certain questions were asked to me, and the first few questions also that were asked, one question I answered. Then the first few questions that were asked, there was one question on NIA amendment recently, which was around 1 year old, but that question was asked. Then something about the juvenile justice, what is the system? So I answered that the institutions involved with it were the question. So I said there's the Juvenile Justice Board. Then sir asked me another, so is there anything else apart from that? So I couldn't recollect. So the first 2-3 questions that were asked, there were a lot of factual questions were there, and I couldn't answer them. So I think one thing that sort of didn't make me happy during the interview was there were a lot of factual questions which were asked, which I sometimes didn't know the answer to. So although I knew that we'd been told that you can just simply say no and move on, but sometimes when there are more than 2-3 no's, then you start feeling that this is something that I didn't know. Similarly, there were so history questions were there, and 2-3 history questions were asked about, say, there was this 1812 May a war which happened related to Britain, which I didn't know from off the top of my head. Then there was something immediately after that, sir asked a question about continuous voyage, but in context of World War II. So that also I didn't know.
Okay.
So it was my subject as well, and there were these 2-3 questions, very factual questions, but I didn't know them. So it just sort of pulls you down. But I try to tell myself that I think you should approach each question anew, not let the baggage of the previous question come to the next one. So in terms of positives, there were certain questions on governance that were asked that I thought I could answer well. So certain differences between the Kerala model of governance versus Gujarat versus Punjab. That was one question that was asked. Then a lot of nice questions were asked about my school, Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, its links to the national education policy, the system of education there. So that I thought I could answer well as well. So these were areas where I thought I would answering well. There were certain questions about my hobbies which were asked, factual questions again about, say, what are the 8 limbs of yoga and which movies I had watched. So these questions I was quite comfortable in. But the volley of factual questions with regarding to history and in the beginning as well, that sort of threw me off a little. So overall I was not very happy because I thought since there were a lot of factual questions, there was no avenue for me to have sort of a conversation or a sustained conversation, which is interesting also sometimes to have with the panelists.
If you divide the whole interview in 2 parts, one facts-based question, other is the kind of application, your views and opinion. Yes. So how much in terms of time it was devoted on fact-based question and on opinion-based questions?
Yes, sir, for me personally, and this also I've talked to other people as well, so it depends sometimes.
No, in your case?
In my case, it was I think 60 would be 60 would be fact and 40 or would be some sort of opinion based questions.
Okay, you said you could have performed better, but you got the feeling right in the middle of the hour. You felt that way towards the end?
Because my starting was a lot of facts, so I was a little after my beginning. So the chairman sir asked questions first, and chairman sir asked a lot of questions about CNI, juvenile justice. One other question also I can't remember, but there were certain factual questions. So in the end, the second panelist also started with certain factual questions about the Lichavis and the Mauryas and their fight or something like that. Towards the end, the third and the fourth panelist, they were sort of opinion-based questions where I was talking. And then the last panelist also was history factual questions. So the beginning and the end both.
So same cycle completed. Yes. That was very interesting. Yes. So now so much about the interview. Now once the interview is over and the result comes, that is very, very anxious moment because almost 55-60 days.
Yes,
so that's very anxious. And how did you handle those emotions, your thought process? Because I remember 26th May, the last interview yours was on 8th April.
Yes,
so that time, and after that they took about 3-4 days. So around 29th or 30th May So from 8th April to 30th May, it's a long journey. How did you utilize and what were your thought process during that period?
Yes, sir. It was definitely a very anxious period, but I told myself that, I can't possibly be anxious for 2 months because it's a really long time, so I need to involve myself in something else. So immediately after that were a few days. After that, I just told myself to keep it away in another part in my brain. I used to not try to think about what happened because otherwise you're ruminating on every single question, that could have been answered better, this could have been answered better. Anyway, I was not very happy with how it went. So I tried to just push it back. I tried to keep positive thoughts only that, even if certain marks are down, maybe my mains marks sort of pull me up, all of that was there. But I tried to keep it away. I started doing my masters also in sociology in Delhi School of Economics at that time. So I focused on that at that time. Apart from that, I had also started towards the end, after 15-20 days, I had started doing a little bit of prelims based study as well for the next prelims because I had that time. So because you never know what happens. Although I wasn't able to do it very well because at that point you're not in either boat and that concentration is not there. But little bit I had started going through current affairs for prelims as well.
I'm surprised that a person who makes the first rank is still prepared for the next year's preliminary. I also understand you got 173 in your interview, but even if you got 119, you still would have been the topper. Can you give some message for the young people?
Yes, sir. I'd just like to say that, realize why you're sitting for this examination. I think and a sort of inner motivation is very important because there'll be lots of ups and downs in the journey. It's a very long journey. It can be very strenuous and mentally taxing as well. So having an inner source of motivation as to why you want to do this is very, very important. Give your 100%. I think honesty in anything that you're doing, not just this examination, but if you have any other passion in life, giving your 100% is very important because you shouldn't have any regrets at the end of it. So even for example, I had not made it this time, I wouldn't have been harsh on myself because I knew that I had given my 100%. Even after that, if you don't get it, as you said, it is this examination is also sometimes a matter of chance, and luck also plays a major factor in it. Lots of people give their 100% but still don't make it. So I think we should always take it in a positive way. Whatever happens, I think sometimes happens for a reason. Last time I did not, I could write the examination in Hindi, but I think there was also a reason behind it. So try to look at everything in a positive light, give your 100%, and I think leave the rest to destiny or whatever you call it. And I think that would be my message to the people.
So thank you very much. And before we let you go, the one rapid round of questions. So young people, they got angry. What makes you angry?
So what makes me angry sometimes is, I think, people being disrespectful to other people, and this sort of sometimes this weird hierarchy that exists in society really angers me, where some people consider themselves somewhat like different or higher off than the other people and use it against them. So this sort of disparity in society and hierarchy in society angers me. So.
And what makes you sad and what makes you happy?
Sir, in terms of sadness also, I think it's linked to this only, but I think again people being unkind to other people is something that is really saddening. In terms of happiness, I think seeing people around me happy, people I love, whether it's my parents, or I think kindness in any form, just seeing it around us, whether it's animals, whether it's children, I think it's something that innately makes you happy, seeing other people be kind to each other and being happy people around me. So I think that's very that's what makes me.
Thanks indeed. It was very, very enjoyable. It was a sheer delight. I'm sure many people will draw inspiration from your talk. So
thank you, sir.
This was Ms. Shruti Sharma, All India Rank 1 of UPSC Civil Service Examination 2021. Thank you.